about the past 12 years, Lisa and I, along with my pastoral staff, because they didn't have any choice, and the rest of the church that was interested, we have started to set aside 21 days of the year to fast. We've done what is commonly referred to as the Daniel fast. And I want to explain that a little bit this morning. And the reason we do this is because we want to give God the first part of our year. We want to make a point of putting God first as we start a new year. I want to ask that His will would be accomplished in my life and the life of the church for the rest of the year. And there's something about bringing your first fruits to God that moves heaven in a way that I can't really explain to you. It's a spiritual principle. It's just a law of heaven that God wants your first fruits. And so we set aside this first part of the year and give this to Him. And then for the rest of the year, His blessing rests on us. We fast and pray to seek God's wisdom, seek His direction. And this year I want to invite you to join me. I want to invite you to join our church family as we kick off the year, January 5 through the 26th, a 21-day fast. And what we're going to do is we're going to break that fast together at our annual business meeting, which will be January the 26th in the evening. We always have a potluck before that business meeting. And so at 5 o'clock, we're going to come together and we'll break that fast together. And then we'll have our business meeting. And I can't think of a better way to go into a business meeting, talk about the business of the church, than after we've just spent some time fasting and praying. Now, there's something that happens when we fast and pray. There's something that is partly a mystery that I can't explain to you. I can't tell you why it's so impactful. I can't tell you why it's so effective. But friends, fasting works. Scripture is full of people who fasted in both the Old and the New Testament. Matter of fact, it is just about every character in the Bible. They spent time fasting. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't practice this spiritual discipline as often as we should. Matter of fact, for many of us, if we would be honest this morning, we've never done a spiritual fast. We've never done a time of praying and fasting before the Lord. And you need to know fasting was a normal part of Jesus' day, of His life, I should say. He didn't fast every day, but it was a normal part of His life. It was a normal part of life for the Jews of Jesus' day. They fasted on a regular basis. And so as we prepare for our annual Refuge Church Daniel fast, I wanted to give you some practical teaching, some practical insight on the discipline of fasting. I want to answer some questions on the subject. And before we get to, I want to answer 3 questions today. But before we get to those, I wanted to tell you what I do not want to do today. I do not want to make you feel bad about not fasting. I'm not here to try and make you feel like you've blown it somehow or you're not as spiritual as somebody else. That's not my intent at all. Neither am I trying to manipulate you into fasting. This is something that you need to do with your eyes wide open, with a heart that is laid out before the Lord. You need to enter into this because you feel like God is asking you to do it, not because the pastor is trying to manipulate you. So I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm not trying to manipulate you. This talk is just basically a fasting 101 talk. I hopefully today want to explain to you what fasting is and what it isn't. And I hope you get fired up about it. I hope that you'll see by the end of this talk the incredible life-changing spiritual discipline that fasting is and what it does in the Christian's life. And I'm believing by the time I'm done this morning, you're going to be ready to jump in with both feet with me as we kick off the new year with our annual Refuge Church Daniel fast. The first question I want to answer today is this: what is fasting? What exactly is it? Now, I'm talking about a biblical view of it. What does the Bible say to us about fasting? Why does the Bible even talk about it? What's so important about it? Well, if you remember, the Bible was written in the Old Testament, it was written in Hebrew. New Testament was basically mostly written in Greek and Aramaic. And so you need to look at the original language to understand what the word fasting was. And in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, the word was tsum. Tsum. And literally translated, it means to cover your mouth voluntarily. To shut your mouth. And this is always, in the Bible, it's always in reference to food. It means to voluntarily abstain from food. That's what the Hebrew word means. In the New Testament, in the Greek, the word is neshuo. Neshuo means to abstain from food and or drink for a religious exercise. It's much more specific. It means that we're going to abstain from food and possibly drink too for a religious purpose. And friends, fasting from a biblical perspective is always abstaining from food. However, it is never only abstaining from food. It is always combined with prayer. When you talk about a biblical view of fasting, it is always an abstinence from food while engaging in prayer. In our modern culture, we have found there are a lot of other things that it's good for us to fast. There are times when you starting the new year, fasting some modern conveniences or some modern things may be good for you. That does not mean that we do that instead of abstaining from food or instead of praying. It's just we're in a culture now where there are probably some things which you could add to your fast which would do you some good, like the media. About 3.5, maybe 4 years ago now, I was at the doctor, and my blood pressure was just going up and up and up and up and up. And he'd been working with me, and of course I didn't want to hear it was because I was overweight. And one of the things he asked me was, how much news do you watch? And I said, probably no more than anyone else. He said, get specific. Do you watch it in the morning? I said, yeah. Do you look at it on the internet during the day? I said, yeah. He said, do you watch it at night? I said, yeah. He said, stop it. What I didn't know is my doctor, who is about my age, maybe a little younger than me, had a stroke. And one of the things his doctor told him was stop watching the news. That was 4 years ago. I don't miss it. Some of you need to turn that channel off because it's stressing you out or it's getting your head full of a bunch of garbage. Let me tell you something. I don't care if you watch Fox News or CNN or if you read the Post or the Times or whatever it is you get your media from. There's a jaded, slanted view given to you. And it can do a lot of things to us, and one of the things it can do is negatively affect our spirit. I'm not saying don't be informed. I'm not saying don't be a world citizen. I'm not saying don't be engaged in our political system. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is don't have this steady diet where all you talk about is what Fox News is talking about. Yes. I love you. Maybe you need to fast TV for a while, or the internet, or Facebook, or InstaTwit, or whatever it is that you're on. One of the things that's good to do during a fast is to cut out some of those non-essentials that are time wasters. Some of those things that just suck your time. For me, my weakness is television. If I turn on the TV, I can escape. And I can sit there for hours. So for me, one of the things I do at the beginning of the year is I cut that down. I limit myself. It's just part of the process in the modern world we live in. There are things that are distracting you, especially concerning your relationship with God. Now, friends, there are a few things I'm going to ask you not to fast this new year. I'm going to ask that you don't fast bathing or brushing your teeth. We will all thank you if you continue in that vein. And don't fast your employment either. Now, I'm sure you could argue that that is one of the things that is distracting you from your relationship with God. But it could become a hindrance to your ability to please your spouse or others around you, for that matter, if you were to stop bathing or going to work. Friends, there are 3 types of fasts in the Bible. The first one is a normal fast. Normal fast is that you drink only water for a specific period of time. That's what Moses did in the wilderness for 40 days. That's what Jesus did in the wilderness for 40 days. He lived on water alone. There is the complete fast, or the absolute fast that's talked about in the Bible, and that is where you abstain from food and drink completely, and that is usually never more than a day. You cannot go very long without liquids in your body. It's amazing how long you can go without food, but you can't do that for long. And then there's the partial fast, which is the one we're going to be doing. Partial fast is a fast where we set aside certain foods and beverages. We cut them out. And we call it the Daniel fast because we find principle for this in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. In Daniel chapter 10, the first few verses of chapter 10, it talks about Daniel fasted for 21 days. And in Daniel chapter 1, it talks about he abstained from all kinds of different foods. So we get 21 days and the certain kind of foods we fast from the book of Daniel. That's why we call it the 21-day Daniel fast. Now, that's what fasting is. You can either go just water for a period of time, you can fast everything, or you can do a partial fast. You set aside a period of time. That's what fasting is. Let me tell you 6 things that fasting is not. Fasting is not a biblical diet or a weight loss plan. Friends, without prayer, fasting is just starving yourself. We don't do this just to lose weight. Now, most of us in here could lose some weight, and it wouldn't hurt us a bit. Oh, look at you, pious bunch. Most of you in here we're not on a biblical weight loss plan. This isn't the Biggest Loser here. We are setting aside some time where we're abstaining from food. We're cutting out certain foods like carbohydrates and sugar, proteins, some of the proteins. But that is not so we can lose weight. It's so that we can focus our attention on prayer. So number 1, fasting is not a weight loss program. Number 2, fasting is not a means of attaining salvation or forgiveness from sin. We don't fast. You don't have to fast and pray to get saved. You don't have to fast and pray to go to heaven. You don't have to fast and pray to be forgiven. Those are all gifts from the Lord. There is 0 price tag attached to those things. You cannot fast your way into heaven. You must have Jesus. Fasting is not a magic wand that we wave over something that forces God or manipulates God into doing what we want. It's not what fasting is. Fasting is not a way to obtain God's blessing or His favor. And finally, fasting is not a way to prove anything to God or to anyone else for that matter. Matter of fact, Jesus said, when you fast, don't let anyone know you're doing it. Don't walk around like, oh, I'm so hungry. Oh, I can't have any caffeine. If you do that, you've just gotten your reward. And Jesus said, he said this way, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. The only one needs to know that you're fasting is God. That's who it's between, you and God. So bottom line, friends, fasting is the voluntary denial of an otherwise normal activity of eating and drinking for the purpose of intense spiritual activity and focus. Fasting is set aside time when you would normally be preparing that meal or eating that meal or clean up from that meal to spend that time in prayer. So why do we fast? That's what fasting is. Well, why do it? If it doesn't manipulate God, if it doesn't get you into heaven, and if it isn't so that we can get skinny, then why do it? Well, there are three reasons why we fast. And this is probably the most important thing you're going to hear me say today. This point right here. We fast to dethrone King's stomach. It has been said that the way to a man's heart is through his... Come on, guys, admit it. It's true. But here's the thing I want you to hear this morning. I'm just going to be candid with you about my life. I find that when my eating is out of control, my spiritual disciplines follow suit. When I'm eating garbage, like I have been for the last month and put on about 8 pounds, everything else seems to fall to the wayside. So, one of the things that fasting does is it realigns you. There seems to be a link between my discipline in eating and my disciplines in spiritual matters. Don't believe me? Just look at the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, the object that was used to test man was food. It was a piece of fruit. A piece of fruit that God had said, Adam, I've given you all this other stuff. This tree right here, don't eat off that one. This one's mine. It was Adam's tithe. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 says this. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and she ate it. And then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. When she saw that it was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. That's the big three. Those are the three things that man has struggled with since the garden. They are the three things that you and I need to conquer in our lives. They are the things that King's stomach has to be dethroned because of. Friends, listen. King's stomach trumped obedience to God in the garden. King's stomach trumped the instruction that God had given to his man. God had given Adam very specific instruction regarding this tree. Adam walked with God in the cool of the day, the Bible tells us. Now, I can't even fathom what that must have been like. Our minds can't even go there. There is no point of reference for us. But imagine, just try and imagine if you could, walking with the creator of all this on a daily basis, and the only thing that it cost you was not eating off of one tree in a garden full of fruit trees. King's stomach said, gotta have that too. Fast forward a few thousand years, and the second Adam, Jesus Christ, comes along, and the devil comes to tempt him again. How did he get the last one? Food. How does he start with the second Adam? Food. The devil's methods haven't changed one bit. Look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 through 4 with me this morning. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. I want you to see that. This had to happen. This was part of God's plan. Jesus had to go back to the place where it all went sideways. Jesus had to go back to where Adam and Eve blew it in the garden. Jesus was required to be tempted in every way, just like you and I are, so that he could look at you and go, I know what it's like. Don't tell me that I don't know what it's like. Jesus goes to the Garden goes to the wilderness this time. Instead of being in a lush garden, he's in a desert. He goes for the specific purpose of what? Being tempted by the devil. And after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. That's one of the most obvious scriptures in the Bible. And the tempter came. Remember what I said to you about when my eating's out of control, my spiritual disciplines are out of control? The devil knew right when to strike Jesus. If you think for a minute the devil's this dumb character that's just kind of waving his sword around willy-nilly trying to cut whoever he can, you've missed it. The Bible says we're not unaware of his schemes because he's cunning and he's good at what he does. Jesus is about to be tested at his weakest moment as a man. And look at what the devil says. If you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become food. You see, the first temptation of Jesus revolves again around food. Beloved, this temptation of Jesus is paramount because he went back to where sin entered the world. He was tempted in the same areas of Adam and Eve, the lust of the flesh. He was hungry. The lust of the eyes and the pride of life. I don't have time to get into the other two temptations this morning, but understand that Jesus passed that test. He overcame. And when he did that, he proved he was the sinless Lamb of God, the perfect sacrifice that was going to take away the sins of the world. But notice what he did first. Before he was tempted, he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights before he faced that enemy, before he took on that temptation. He understood something about the spiritual discipline of fasting. He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for one purpose, to be tempted. Jesus understood, before I take this temptation on, I better get my spiritual disciplines in order. And I want to say to you this morning, before you take 2020 on, you need to get King's stomach under control, and you need to get your spiritual disciplines in order. Who knows what's going to be coming this year? Who knows what you're going to be facing and dealing with this year? It may be the best year ever. It may be the year that you bury somebody. And I want to encourage you to learn a lesson here from Jesus. There is something powerful that happens when we put King's stomach where he belongs. He fasted before he took that challenge on. In the scriptures, friends, the stomach is always symbolic of fleshly appetites. Always. That's always what it's symbolizing. Fasting is an opportunity for you and I to lay down an appetite. This small act of self-denial becomes something that gives us the strength and the ability to overcome things that overcome us. So number one, when we fast, we dethrone King's stomach. Number two, we fast to purify ourselves. Now, I've already said to you, fasting cannot earn you salvation. Fasting doesn't earn you forgiveness. Fasting doesn't pardon our sins. But fasting does purge us and purify us. Now, if you've been paying attention to my sermons in the last 4.5 years, I've been your pastor. You've heard me say this, and I'm going to keep saying it until I'm either not your pastor anymore or Jesus comes. Listen to me. I've said this over and over to you. The physical, the natural, always points to the spiritual. There is always a spiritual lesson to be learned from a physical thing. There is always a correlation to the natural that points us to the supernatural. Fasting is no different. Let me put you on the natural plane for a minute. Doctors and nutritionalists, they will tell you that fasting reaps many health benefits. fasting has all kinds of rewards to it. Fasting cleanses your body from impurities and toxins and poisons and metals that have built up over time due to our American improper diet and the environment we live in. Have you tasted Manteca's water? Have you seen the smog? Just living and breathing today, we soak up impurities and heavy metals. And when you fast, even a partial fast, your body begins to release these toxins. Now, I'm not going to stand here and get started about what's in our food today and how different wheat is today than it was in Jesus' time. I'm not going. But we could go there for a while because the food we eat today has been so altered. It is not as good for us as it used to be. Now, friends, there's all kinds of things that could get cleared up from fasting. Let me give you a partial list of some of the things that nutritionalists and doctors will tell you that fasting can cure in your life. The cold, the flu, autoimmune diseases, coronary disease, hypertension, psoriasis, eczema, Crohn's disease, also that colitis thing. I can't say that word. Allergies, asthma, type 2 diabetes, depression, insomnia, headaches, fatigue. Fasting can cure all those things. And that's just a sample of things that can possibly be healed through fasting. Because almost all the things I mentioned come from a toxic buildup in your body. Now, fasting will flush those toxins out, but let me give you a disclaimer here for a minute. I am not suggesting this morning that if you fast, if you participate in our annual 21-day Refuge Church Daniel fast, that you will be healed for whatever ails you, money back guarantee. That is not what I am saying. Second thing I want you to hear me say this morning is this. If you are suffering from some kind of an ailment, please, please, please consult your doctor before you do any kind of altering of your diet. Please. I am not saying that this is the magic cure-all. But can I tell you something? When I came to be your pastor, I was about 45 pounds heavier. My blood pressure could not be controlled with medicine. It was always at 160 over 100. And I was on blood pressure medicine. And I started cutting out carbohydrates and sugar from my diet. And all those numbers dropped into perfect alignment. And I lost some weight. And then this past month, I lost my mind. And my doctor calls and says, you need your blood work. I'm like, dude, can we do it after January? He said, no, I want it now. And it's all out of control again. Friends, it's been documented by medical science that fasting flushes out your body from toxins that cause sickness and disease. And because you're flushing out toxins, there's a good chance that you will get a headache the first few days you do this. There's a good chance that your tongue will get this nasty coating on it. Your skin could even change color. Don't worry, it's very short-lived. We have a joke in the office every year when we do this, Pastor Chris and I. We talk about fasting breath. We just don't breathe on each other for a few days because... But listen, I told you the physical always points to the spiritual. And just as fasting flushes out your physical body from all these toxins and heavy metals and poisons that can cause sickness and disease, so also fasting flushes out your spirit. It flushes out all the spiritual toxins that build up over time because we rub shoulders with the world, because we may live with a knucklehead, because our boss doesn't get it. Whatever the case may be, maybe you're dealing with something, a personal issue within yourself, and you've allowed it to affect your spirit. Yeah, that can happen. Some of us are in a bad place, and it's all right here. And fasting helps us to get some things back in a line and flushes our spirit. Are you listening? Are you hearing me this morning? Listen, watch this. Spiritual toxins can have a physical effect on us. And fasting is the best means I know by which the inner man can detoxify. The third reason we fast to enhance our vision and our focus. Friends, fasting is kind of like a magnifying glass. You ever look through a magnifying glass? I want to talk to you a little bit about a magnifying glass this morning. I'm getting ready to wrap this up. I told you I wouldn't go long. And nobody wants me to preach for an hour on fasting. But fasting acts like a magnifying glass in several ways, because a magnifying glass enhances our vision. And your vision is enhanced in 3 ways when you fast. Number 1, you get improved focus. If you notice with a magnifying glass, I don't know if you thought about this, but when you're looking through it, the object you're focused on, it doesn't get any bigger. It stays the same size. But the magnifying glass has changed your focus. And it allows you to see much greater detail of that object. The object didn't get any bigger. Your focus did. Friends, when we fast, Jesus doesn't get any bigger. He can't. He's already God. He's already supreme. He's already sovereign. He's already all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present. He can't get any more God than he is. Jesus is already all in all. But what changes when we fast is our focus on him. We see him with greater clarity when we detoxify our spirit. The second thing that gets improved is clarity. Have you ever noticed when you're looking through a magnifying glass, it's only in the center of that glass that the object is clear. But on the edges, out of the center of the glass, it becomes fuzzy, out of focus. But in the center, that image is much larger and very, very clear. When we fast, watch this, friends, Jesus comes into much sharper focus, much greater clarity. Wow, this is so cool. Simultaneously, everything outside of that focus becomes fuzzy. It begins to sharpen our attention and our focus on what's important in the middle. And the things on the peripheral, they're not as in focus anymore. Kind of reminds me of an old song. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of this earth become strangely dim in the light of his glory and his grace. Something about fasting sharpens our attention like we're looking at Jesus through a magnifying glass. And all the stuff that has been distracting us, King's stomach, all those spiritual toxins, that person that you don't like at church, your kids, your spouse, whatever it is that is those things, you realize they're not the problem. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm saying they're not the problem. You've been focusing on the wrong things. Your focus is off. And fasting helps us put our focus and our attention back where it belongs. You see, when you look through a magnifying glass, you'll notice that you move closer to the object as you're looking. Why is that? Well, it's because of a principle called focal length. And a magnifying glass has a relatively short focal length. So it's out of necessity that when you're looking at something, you bend down, you get closer to it, and the object becomes bigger. The user of the magnifying glass is the one required to get closer for optimum viewing. Jesus hasn't moved. If you don't sense Jesus in your life, it's not because he's gone anywhere. If you aren't hearing from him on a regular basis, it's not because he's being silent. It's because your focus is off. It's because you have changed positions. And when we fast, it's like a magnifying glass. We draw closer to him. We're drawn closer and closer, and we see him in a detail we've never seen him before. And when we look at him that way, the things that were distracting us, the things that were toxins in our life, they get put into the perspective they belong. When we sense his presence more fully, when we see him more clearly, when we hear him more intimately, that's when we develop a deeper intimacy with him. We begin to draw more fully into his presence. And we develop a desire to focus on the things he cares about, the things that matter to him. We find ourselves caring about the things that Jesus wants us to care about. Do you want to know what Jesus cares about? We call them lost people. That's an offensive way of saying it. I wouldn't want someone to tell me you're lost. I just call them pre-Christians. People that don't know Jesus in the fullness of knowing who he really is, of getting a glimpse of the love and the joy of knowing him. They've been sold a bill of goods that he's a hater, that he's a fun taker. Nothing could be further from the truth. He cares about people who don't know him. He cares about the church. And he cares about, watch this, you want to know what Jesus came to do? The will of his Father. And when we fast, we begin to care about the will of the Father more than the will of King Stomach. Oh, beloved, I can't think of a better way to start a new year, let alone a new decade. I want to encourage you to join us. As we launch into 2020, we set aside 21 days in January from the 5th to the 26th to improve our focus, to increase our clarity, and to draw closer to Jesus. Come on, man. Next Sunday, we're going to kick that off. And let me just explain something to you. Because I've learned over the years that God is way more interested in the heart and the spirit of the matter than the law of the matter. Let me say it to you again. He's way more interested in your heart than the rules. When you read Daniel, you're going to read this list of things that he cut out of his life because he felt that's what God was asking him to do. Basically, you become a vegan for 21 days. The first year we did this, we had several of our men who had really bad side effects from that. Their metabolism didn't work right. And I have learned in talking with my doctor and trying to get myself as healthy as I can, that there are certain things I can't cut out of my diet. I'm not going to go into them because the law people that are in this room today. So I'm not going to follow that exactly. I sit down with the Lord and say, Lord, I am going to set this time aside, and I'm going to cut these things out of my diet as my fast to you. And friends, it needs to be a sacrifice. You know, if you don't drink coffee, say, well, I'm going to cut caffeine out. Go team. But I will say this, I love carbohydrates. So I'll be cutting that out. I love sweets. I love sugar. If you start reading labels, you'll be surprised how much sugar is in your diet. And sugar is poison. I want you to spend this next week, read those passages in Daniel, Daniel 10, Daniel chapter 1. Look at it. I promise you, my wife will follow it to the letter. Because that is how she works. Not so much. Because that's how I work. I need to stop now, don't I? Let's start the year right.